Hi there, this is video 6, which covers pages 8 and 9 in your notes. Now, one of the most powerful logical functions in Microsoft Excel is an if function. And I want to show you how you can transform data using the if function. Let's start by selecting column K. If I select column K and press Control plus, then that will insert a new column. And I want to call this hire underscore year underscore ranges. So what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to put the year that these employees were hired into ranges or bins or groups. And basically I want to say, look, if somebody was hired in a year that was less than 2000, then our business didn't start to 1980. So they fall into the 1980 to 2000 group, and everybody else was in the 2000 plus group. Okay, so in K2 we go equals I. That's enough for you to then be able to double click and trigger the if function. Now, an if function has 3 arguments. They call them arguments in formulas, which is meaning it needs 3 pieces of information. Each argument or piece of information is separated by a comma. Now, if you look visually here, the visual cue is basically saying it needs a test from you, comma, what do you want to do if the test result is true, comma, what do you want to do if the test result is false? So let's start by doing the test. The test is if this year here in J2 is less than 2000, the year 2000, that's my test. If the year they were hired was less than 2000, comma, and notice it says, what do you want to do if it's true? It goes bold. Well, then I want to show text. So text always appears in double quotes. So double quote, and these people would be 1980 to 2000. And in fact, and then double quote. And in fact, I want to make this more precise. If J2 is less than or equal to 2000, then they fall in the 1980 to 2000 group. So let's change this less than to less than equal to. If they're less than or equal to 2000, they fall into the 1980 to 2000 group, comma. If that's false, they fall into the double quote 2000 plus group. So as I click on each argument, if I click on J2 with the use of bold, it says this is your test. When I click on 1980, it says this is your true. And when I click on 2000, it says this is your false. Yeah, and I might even say 2001 plus. It just depends on how pedantic you want to be. If I press enter, basically because Abby was hired in 2013, she falls into the 2001 plus group. And if I click on that and double click the thin black cross in the bottom right corner, it tells me what group or range that employee falls into as far as when they were hired. So that's an if statement. What do you want to do if it's true? What do you want to do if it's false? But in reality, we often have more than one true and one false. We often say, oh, look, if it's this, do that, and if it's this, do that, and if it's this, do that, and if it's this, do that. You can have actually up to 64 possible results. And so I want to extend this formula, and I basically want to say this company started in 1980. So if they were hired in between 1980 and 1990, I need to show that. And between 1990 and 2000, I need to show that. And between 2000 and 2010, between 2010 and 2020, the different ranges. So I'm going to go Control Z to undo, Control Z to undo. And I'm going to put another if function in here. And I'm going to say equals I, which is enough for me to double click if, or if you're a key person like me, just press tab. And that's another way. You can't press enter because that means you're done and you're not done yet. So press tab. Now if J2, and you could click it or just hit the left arrow, if J2 is greater than 2020, let's start with the highest, comma. If that's true, then double quote 2020 plus double quote. So if the year they were hired is greater than 2020, they fall into that range or that group, comma. Now, if that's not true, the false is another if. So the false is an if. Press I. Press tab. My second test, therefore, is if J2 is greater than 2010, because I've done the 2020s. If it's greater than 2010, comma, then they fall into the double quote 2010 to 2020 group, comma. The false is another if. I, tab, if J2 is greater than 2000, that's my test, so always keeping an eye on this visual cue. If J2 is greater than 2000, comma, if that's true, then they fall into the 2000 to 2010 group, comma. But if that's not true, if J2 is greater than 1990, comma, they fall into the 1990 to 2000 group. And if that's not true, well, we didn't start the business until 1980, so they must therefore fall into, comma, the final false is they must fall into the 1980 to 1990 group. So if, let me just click back on that, there's my first test. If J2 is greater than 2020, if that's true, show that. But if J2 is greater than 2010, then show that if it's true. But if J2 is greater than 2000, then show that. Otherwise, if J2 is greater than 1990, show that. Otherwise, just show that, because we didn't start to 1980, so they must fall into that. Now at the end, we typically close the bracket. But because we've got a nested if statement, we have to use more than one closed bracket. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 instances of the word if. That means you need 4 closed brackets. 1, 2, 3, 4. And see how it sort of pairs them off as well, and color codes them if your eyesight's good. So I'm going to press enter. And so Abby was hired in 2013. She falls into the 2010 to 2020 group. And if I click on that result and double click the thin black cross, it will tell me, as I scroll down and have a look, the groups or the bands that each person falls into. And most of them are after 2000. Very few. We must have started with a small staff in the early days. So that's an example of an if statement and a nested if. Extremely powerful for manipulating data and getting it all prepared for your reports and your pivot tables. Now practice what you've learnt, absorb what we've covered, and I'll see you in the next video.